Senator Andrzejczyk on debate.
Thank you. Honourable colleagues, I hope I'm not going to take over the mantle of Senator Baker, who would stand up and say, I'll only say a few words. My intention is to only say a few words, so correct me if I go on a bit longer. I want to applaud all of the senators who entered in this debate. I think that is the Senate at its finest, where in fact research has been done very, very thoroughly by from so many perspectives. And I did have my speech with my findings, but I thought it's been done adequately. So what I really want to do is touch a few points that are important to me and points that I haven't heard as much about. So I want to associate myself with all the honourable senators who have raised concerns about this bill. One reason that I have concerns about this bill is that I believe the government has the right to introduce whatever legislation it wishes. But in a modern society such as Canada, it has a responsibility to put forward a strategy, to cost it out, to time plan it, and to make sure that the public is aware sufficiently so that they can have a reasoned and fulsome debate in the community. My concern is that has not happened. An announcement was made in a platform of a party, and after there was an announcement to proceed. But it has been very piecemeal, and I think that those that were engaged and wish to change the laws of marijuana have been involved to a certain extent. Others are just coming forward. Had there been the kind of governance model that I think we're used to? I pine for the old days when we used to have white papers and green papers where people could really respond and engage. Granted, there may have been stakeholder meetings, there may have been some focus groups, but I don't think the Canadian public on something that will fundamentally change the life have been involved. And I think that will be the crucial point that we will face in the future. And I want to put some other points on. I've heard this, that medical marijuana is here, but we are now going to go into recreational use. And recreational use will make, by regulation, a safer product. Well, that may be, but the people I've dealt with in my past are the most vulnerable. I wouldn't say that they use drugs for recreation. They often use drugs for desperation. And they're the ones that perhaps will continue with marijuana on the street because the black market will not go away, or they'll change to other drugs and other ways to cope. I have heard very little debate from the government or others how we will deal with the most vulnerable communities. Those that I used to see in social services, those that I see on the streets, those that are in poverty-stricken positions, those that are coming and finding that life is not the way they thought it could be. So I would hope that the government pays attention because I think it's important. The most important one is children. We are going to shift to what was illegal to legal. However, the difference that I look at is, at the moment, illegal. The government has some responsibility through the criminal courts, through legislation. But once it switches to the government will have the responsibility to ensure the usage and the consequences, both known consequences or unintended consequences. Canada signed on to the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and where we said that we will, in fact, protect the health and well-being of children. We know maturing minds are difficult to deal with. Canada will now have an obligation in a way that it has not had before, and I haven't heard too much what kind of support services we will give to families in crisis when this occurs. Yes, people have said, but we've had alcohol and that. But it was only recently, in the last number of decades, that we understood what fetal alcohol syndrome did to children. It is a lifelong sentence, not only for those children, but their families. The same could happen from what I've heard from the very kind senators who did all the research. We really don't know the full consequences of marijuana. Yet, we are going to say, as a government and as a society, if we pass this bill, that's okay. We will monitor it. We are going to experiment and test on future generations without, I think, the proper analysis, the proper supports, the proper analysis that goes with the dollars. We know in addiction, we know in alcohol, we give some money, and it looks like a lot, but it's not. Most of the money gets directed to general revenue, and I think that will be a shame. Education, everyone has touched on education, but I thought that we were traveling with the National Finance Committee, and we raised this issue with Minister Friesen, Finance Minister in Manitoba. And here is his quote on December 8th, 2017. He said, if we want to do this well, implementing marijuana, we require adequate time. Mistakes are going to be made here, and Canadians should be disabused of any notion to the contrary. Like it or not, cannabis will be legal. And he was speaking before the July 2nd date was perhaps in question. But he went on to say, our premier spoke to the governor of Colorado, and he said, if we had only more time. He reflected on one point. Looking back now, we had no idea. When you look at the morbidity rates, injury and deaths on highways, mental illness, and suicide rates amongst youth, there is so much to get right. We can't underscore enough the importance of even things like an education campaign. And then Minister Friesen said, I'm a former educator. I know what it means to deliver a message, but to truly teach and change behavior takes a long time. Youth need to hear this message again and again and again. My difficulty is that I've heard from the government, we will do this. We have a campaign, we're preparing, we are planning. Yet, we are months from what the government anticipates will be law. There is no time to prepare adequately, and that concerns me. It's a governance issue, not a question of whether their policy is the right one or not. I also have an issue. The Prime Minister recently said that his approach to Aboriginals in our communities will be on a rights-based approach. Yet, most of the Aboriginal community I deal with have not been consulted and have not had their full say. Is this the rights-based approach that we are offering? And one other area, international obligations. We know that there are 3 conventions that will be violated, and perhaps more. Foreign Affairs and International Trade is just starting our study on this. We know that Canada has been on the forefront of saying no reservations on any international convention, no pulling out. We have built over decades an international network of conventions, and we've been on the vanguard to say, no, you can't pick and choose, because when we come to, and often it's a watered-down consensus on a convention, we want to strive and have people adhere to those conventions and the declarations and the protocols. We are now moving off, and we don't know what that will mean. It may be that some way will be found, but we know that very limited measures are in place. Very little thought has been given. How do we get out of this conundrum? We're now facing a world where our international norms are at risk. We know the countries who do not wish the norms and values that we've set out, who don't adhere to the International Covenant on Human Rights. We've built up at least some semblance of an international order. We risk now, for the first time, either having to pull out and provide a reservation or find some way. But we will be signaling for the first time in many decades that we do not have the full respect of these agreements that we have signed. And I think it's very crucial in this world. My final point is that I was here when Senator Nolan was here. Senator Nolan and I did not agree. I did not want to legalize marijuana. He did. He convinced the Senate to have a study. But there has been this myth that it is a Senate study. He started the study. He was given the resources, and he did an adequate job on that. When the report was tabled in the chamber here, there was no appetite to approve it. Instead, Senator Nolan gave notice of an inquiry and spoke to it. That inquiry did not proceed. It fell off the order paper in prorogation. And I must say that I think we should all read it, because it wasn't a conclusion of legalizing marijuana. It was a conclusion of strategies of how to get there. There are some excellent, excellent roadmaps that if we had followed, perhaps all of us could have lived with the change in our society. It is thoughtful, it includes society, and I have gone just recently from recommendation 1 to recommendation 11. If only we had followed Senator Nolan's report, we would not be in this difficult situation of being asked to pass a law without what I call the homework from a government being done. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Senator Martin on debate.
Thank you, Your Honor. Honourable Senators, I rise also today to speak at second reading of Bill C-45, an act respecting cannabis and to amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Criminal Code, and other acts. So much has been said already, and like Senator Andrzejczyk, I chose to highlight a few additional points that I felt were not as fully discussed.